The alarm didn't sound when Kale Marin entered the throne chamber. It never did for medical personnel. Their biosignatures were cleared at every checkpoint, a courtesy extended by the Galactic Compact to ensure healers could reach casualties without delay. But the Vorath Royal Guard noticed her the moment she crossed the threshold, because the scar on her neck was glowing. Not glowing the way human scars sometimes caught light. Glowing the way Vorath death marks glowed. The ceremonial brands burned into the flesh of enemies sentenced by the Queen herself. Violet. Pulsing. Alive with something that had no business being on a human medic from the 3rd Relief Battalion. Kale felt the shift in the room before she saw it. 12 guards in obsidian armor moved without sound. And, suddenly, the path behind her was closed. She kept walking. Stopping would signal fear, and fear in this chamber was the same as confession. The Queen of the Vorath Dominion sat on a throne carved from the bones of a dead moon. Saritha Valmora was 7 feet tall, her carapace the deep blue-black of deep ocean trenches, her 4 eyes tracking Kale with the slow, terrible precision of a creature that had never in her 300 years of life been wrong about danger. "Human," said the Queen. "Not a greeting. A designation. Your Majesty." Kale stopped at the required distance and held up her medical kit with both hands, the universal gesture of non-threat. "I was called for the young one." Silence. The kind that pressed against your eardrums. In the corner of the vast chamber, behind a screen of translucent membrane, something small moved. A child, Vorath, no older than 6 cycles by the size of its carapace, sat curled against the wall, one arm held at a wrong angle, breathing in the shallow, hitching pattern Kale had learned to recognize as Vorath pain suppression. They didn't cry. They compressed. Folded inward like dying stars. "You were not cleared for this chamber," the Queen said. "The duty officer cleared me at the outer gate." Kale kept her voice level. "The child's secondary respiratory node is compromised. If the inflammation reaches the central cluster, I see the mark on your throat." The room became a held breath. Kale had been waiting for it. She didn't flinch, didn't reach up to cover it, didn't explain. She stood still and let the Queen look, because Saritha Valmora was not a creature you rushed. Every word spoken too fast would be counted against her. "Vrethkor," the Queen said. One of the guards answered immediately. "The mark is authentic. Structure matches Royal Burn Seal, 3rd Dynasty. Depth consistent with direct application." A pause. "It is old. Approximately 8 standard years." 8 years ago, Kale had been 19. She had been in a field camp on Vorath-occupied Demas IV. She had not known what the soldier was doing when he grabbed her, only that she had woken up with her neck on fire and her entire unit dead around her. She had survived by accident. The Vorath soldier had assumed she was dead and moved on. She had never removed the mark because removing Vorath ceremonial scarring required a licensed Vorath physician, and, for 8 years, no Vorath physician had been willing to touch a human body long enough to help. The Queen stood. She did not move quickly. She did not need to. She crossed the floor of the throne chamber with the slow, absolute certainty of something that had never been denied, and she stopped 3 feet from Kale and looked down at the scar with all 4 eyes. "This mark names you enemy of the crown," Saritha Valmora said. "It names you human killer. A soldier who has taken Vorath life and been sentenced for it. I know what it means. Then, you know I am required by law and ritual to have you removed from this chamber and processed accordingly." "Yes." Kale looked past the Queen at the child in the corner. "After I treat the young one." The silence that followed was the most dangerous of Kale's life. She could feel the guards' targeting systems warming. She'd been in enough combat zones to know that sound, the faint harmonic hum of weapons moving from standby to ready. She did not look at them. She looked at the child, who was now looking back at her with 4 eyes wide and dark and frightened. Children looked the same everywhere. That was the thing nobody ever put in the briefings. The Queen said nothing for 11 seconds. Kale counted. Then, Saritha Valmora stepped aside. "Not fully. Not warmly. But, enough. You have until the child stabilizes," the Queen said. "Then, we will discuss your sentence." Kale walked forward. She did not run. She did not thank the Queen. She crossed the remaining distance to the child and knelt down, and she opened her kit, and she began to work. The child's name was Thesiv. Kale learned this not from the Queen or the guards but from the child itself, which Once Kale had pressed a cooling compress to the swollen node cluster along its ribcage, looked up at her and said the word with the careful enunciation of someone who had been taught that names mattered. "Thesiv," Kale repeated, getting the soft click on the second syllable right. She'd spent 3 years learning basic Vorath phonetics. Right now she was grateful for every tedious hour of it. "I'm Kale. I'm going to help you breathe easier." Thesiv's 4 eyes tracked her hands. Not with fear, with the intense, cataloging focus of a Vorath child processing new information. They learned by observation. Every movement Kale made was being recorded and filed somewhere behind those dark, reflective irises. The inflammation was worse than the duty officer's report had indicated. The secondary respiratory node, a structure with no human equivalent, roughly analogous to a secondary bronchial system, had swollen to nearly double its normal diameter. Left untreated for another 2 hours, it would compress against the primary node and Thesiv would begin to suffocate slowly, from the inside, in the particular Vorath way that gave no outward warning until it was nearly too late. Kale had seen it once before. On Demas 4. In the aftermath. She pushed that away and focused on the readings from her scanner. Behind her, she was aware of the Queen watching. Not pacing, Saritha Valmora did not pace, but standing with the absolute stillness of a predator that had chosen, for the moment, to wait. The guards had not stood down. The hum of their weapon systems remained at ready state. Kale's every motion was being observed, assessed, and recorded. She administered the first compound, a broad anti-inflammatory synthesized specifically for Vorath biology. Human medics in the Compact's joint forces were required to carry it. Using it was another matter. Most never had reason to. Thesiv made a sound. Not pain, release. The compressed, inward sound of a body beginning to unknot. "Good," Kale said softly. "That's good." "You speak to it as though it understands comfort," said the Queen from behind her. "It does." Kale kept her eyes on the scanner. All children understand comfort. The words don't matter. The tone does. Another silence. A different quality to this one. Not the silence of danger restrained, but of something being considered. "The mark on your throat," the Queen said. "Explain it." Kale had known this was coming. She had composed and discarded 30 versions of this explanation over 8 years. She settled, as she always did, on the simplest one. "I was a medic at a forward camp on Demas 4. We were not combatants. The Compact had registered our position as a protected medical site under joint treaty." She paused to adjust the second compound dose. Thesiv's node was responding, but slowly. A Vorath unit moved through the camp. They killed everyone. One of them marked me. I assume he thought I was dead. "Why were you not?" "I was under a collapse tent frame. He couldn't see my vitals." "And the Vorath soldiers you killed to survive." Kale looked up then. Turned, slowly, and met the Queen's 4 eyes directly. "I didn't kill anyone. I was unconscious for 11 hours. When I woke up, I was the only living thing in the camp." She held the gaze. "Your soldier marked the wrong person." The Queen stuttered her. "You have carried an enemy's death mark for 8 years without attempting to have it removed." "I attempted. No Vorath physician would help me." She turned back to Thesiv. "The mark means I can't access most Compact joint facilities, can't serve in certain postings, and get detained every time I enter Vorath-adjacent space. I've built a career in the gaps." A pause. "Tonight, apparently, it nearly got me killed before I could help a sick child." Thesiv's secondary node readings were stabilizing. Another 20 minutes and the inflammation would be manageable. Another hour and Thesiv would be able to breathe fully. The child reached out and placed one small, clawed hand against Kale's wrist. Not grabbing, just resting. The Vorath gesture Kale knew meant acknowledgement. Recognition. "I see you." Kale felt something move in her chest that she didn't have the right words for. "The soldier who marked you," the Queen said. "Do you know his name?" "No. I only saw his armor." "His unit designation." "The mark on my throat is apparently from the 3rd Dynasty burn seal." She glanced back. "Your guard said it. Whatever that means." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Then, she spoke to the guard called Vrethkor in rapid Vorath, too fast and too formal for Kale's functional vocabulary. Vrethkor answered at length. Another guard spoke. Then, silence. The Third Dynasty burn seal has not been used in active military operations for 6 years, the Queen finally said. It was formally retired. The unit that carried it was dissolved following war crime proceedings. The words landed strangely. Kale processed them while keeping her hand steady on Thesiv's treatment. War crime proceedings, she said. Demas IV, said the Queen, and her voice carried something Kale could not immediately name. Among others. The tent. The collapsed frame. The 11 hours of unconsciousness. The camp that had held 43 people when she'd closed her eyes and 7 when she'd opened them. Not 0, 7. 36 who had not been as lucky as Kale. Or unlucky, depending on how you counted the last 8 years. The unit was dissolved, Kale said. What happened to the soldiers? Processed. Under Vorith law. The Queen let the weight of that settle. The war crime proceedings were not a gesture. They were carried out. Kale nodded once. She didn't know what to do with this information. She filed it in the place where she kept things that mattered and couldn't be resolved quickly. Thesiv tugged gently at her wrist. The child's breathing had eased. The 4 eyes were brighter, less compressed. Kale smiled, and Thesiv's secondary eyelids flickered, the Vorith equivalent. The young one will recover fully, the Queen asked. Yes. The inflammation is responding well. I'll leave compound instructions for your physician. She began returning instruments to the kit. They'll need a follow-up check in 12 hours. Our physician was injured in the same incident that harmed Thesiv. The transport accident. We are awaiting a replacement. A pause that felt deliberate. You are here because you were the only medical personnel within reach. Kale looked up sharply. How long until your physician arrives? 30 hours. 30 hours without a medic for a post-crisis patient. In a royal chamber. With a child who would need monitoring. I can stay, Kale said, before she'd fully decided to. If that's... She stopped. Recalibrated. If the Queen permits. The silence stretched. Thesiv was watching the Queen with those 4 wide eyes, and something passed between them that Kale couldn't read. Some frequency of recognition between a ruler and her child that moved faster than words. Your sentence, the Queen said finally, remains to be discussed. I understand. But the sentence cannot be carried out while you are serving a medical function under my roof. She paused. This is also law. Kale understood. She was not free. But she was, for 30 hours, necessary. She would take it. The hours passed in layers. Kale monitored Thesiv through the night cycle. The chamber dimmed to a deep amber that the Vorith used for rest, and the guards changed shifts in absolute silence, and the Queen did not sleep, or if she did it standing with her eyes open and her presence filling the room like pressure at depth. Kale dozed against the wall beside Thesiv's cushioned alcove, waking at intervals to check readings, adjust compounds, ensure the secondary node was not regressing. Thesiv slept with one small hand still resting on Kale's knee. At the 8th hour, Vrethkor approached and knelt, a gesture that startled Kale out of a half-doze. Guards did not kneel. Not to humans. Not to anyone below royal rank. Your record has been accessed, Vrethkor said quietly. The guard's voice was low, controlled, nothing performing deference, just stating facts. Your service history in the Joint Relief Battalions. Field citations. Casualty records from Demas IV onward. A pause. You have treated Vorith patients before. Twice in Camp Verith during the Dorvanian incursion. Once on the compact station at Mirrance Point. Yes. Patients who were. The guard paused, selecting words. Patients who might have expected otherwise. Kale understood the shape of what wasn't being said. She had treated Vorith soldiers in the years after Demas IV. Soldiers from a species that had killed her unit and marked her and left her for dead. She had treated them because they were injured and she was a medic and that was the job. It's what I do, she said simply. Vrethkor studied her with the long, assessing gaze of a guard who had spent centuries learning to read threats and had found something they didn't have a category for. Then, the guard rose and returned to position, and nothing more was said. The Queen had been listening. Kale knew without looking. At the 16th hour, Thesiv woke and ate a small portion of dense, dark Vorith nutrient paste that smelled like copper and salt, and then looked at Kale with those cataloguing eyes and said, with careful enunciation, "The mark on your throat. Does it hurt?" Kale touched the scar instinctively. Not anymore. It did, when it was new. My mother has the same kind of marks. On her back. From before she was queen. Thesiv considered this with the grave focus of a child processing something large. She says marks tell the truth about where you've been. Kale was quiet for a moment. Your mother is right. But, sometimes, Thesiv said, the truth about where you've been isn't the same as the truth about who you are. Kale looked at the child. 6 cycles old. She did the conversion, roughly 8 standard years. Thesiv had lived for as long as Kale had carried the mark. Where did you learn that? Kale asked. Thesiv glanced toward the queen, who was standing at the far end of the chamber with her back turned. A gesture that, in Vorith body language, was not dismissal. It was privacy granted. She told me, Thesiv said. At the 22nd hour, the queen crossed the chamber and stood before Kale. Not looming. Not threatening. Just present. At a distance that acknowledged the medic space without pretending they were equals. I have reviewed the proceedings from Demas 4, Seretha Valmora said. The full proceedings. Not the summarized version distributed to the compact. Kale waited. Your name appears 43 times in the survivor accounts. Not as a casualty. As a resource. The queen's 4 eyes were steady. The 7 who survived. You found them. You treated them. You carried 2 of them to the emergency beacon before the relief battalion arrived. Kale had not spoken of this. The survivor accounts were sealed. She hadn't known the queen could access them. You then served as a primary witness in the proceedings against the unit, the queen continued. Your testimony was a significant factor in the outcome. I told the truth, Kale said. That's all. Yes. The queen paused. The soldier who marked you was among those processed. The mark he placed on you was made illegally, outside of any battlefield designation, applied to a protected medical worker, in violation of 3 separate compact treaties. She paused again. It was not a legitimate death mark. It was a brand applied in excessive authority, by a soldier who was subsequently tried and removed. The words were precise. Careful. Not an apology. Vorith queens did not apologize. But something adjacent to it. Something that required the same courage. The mark, the queen said, was never legitimate. It has no legal standing in the Dominion. It does have physical standing, Kale said quietly. On my neck. Yes. And, here, something shifted in the queen's bearing, something almost imperceptible, but Kale had spent 16 hours in this chamber learning to read this creature's silences. This can be addressed. I've been told no Vorith physician will. I did not say physician. The queen turned toward Vrethkor. Another exchange in rapid Vorith. The guard departed. Thesiv had gone very still, watching. When Vrethkor returned, they carried a case, dark, engraved, old. Older than Kale. Older, perhaps, than the joint compact. The removal of death marks, the queen said, is not a physician's function. In the Dominion, it is a sovereign act. She met Kale's eyes. What was applied unlawfully can only be properly undone by authority. Not medicine. Kale understood what she was being offered. And what it meant. A sovereign act of removal. Not erasure. There would still be a scar, the tissue still changed, the years of carrying it still real. But the mark itself, the Vorith death sentence encoded in the burn, the violet pulse that had followed her across 8 years and 12 postings and 43 compact checkpoints, that would be gone. This is not a debt, the queen said, reading her silence. Thesiv does not owe you a life mark removal. I am not paying a bill. She paused. I am correcting a wrong that was done under my family seal. That is my responsibility. Kale sat very still. The case was open now, and inside it were instruments she didn't recognize, not medical tools, something older, something that moved between ceremony and purpose in the way that only the oldest things did. It will not be painless, the queen said. I know. Kale looked at Thesiv. The child was watching her with those 4 eyes, the cataloguing gaze now carrying something else underneath. Something that looked, in any species, like hope. Do you consent? the Queen asked. Kale Marin, medic, 3rd Relief Battalion, carrier of a dead soldier's illegal brand for 8 years, thought of the tent frame and the 11 hours and the 7 survivors and the 43 checkpoints and the 30 versions of an explanation she'd never quite gotten right. Yes, she said. The Queen knelt. Not as submission, as precision, as the positioning required for the work. She took the first instrument from the case, and Vrethkor knelt on Kale's other side, and Thesiv moved to sit directly in Kale's line of sight, small and serious, and Kale focused on the child's face and breathed. The pain was real. She had expected it. It moved through the scar tissue in waves, following the original burns path in reverse, and she did not flinch because flinching would break the Queen's precision, and she trusted, in this moment, with a clarity that 8 years of accumulated suspicion couldn't quite reach, that the creature working at her throat was doing something careful. Something true. The violet pulse faded. She felt it go, not dramatically, not with any sound or flash, just a gradual dimming, like a signal losing power, like a transmission finally ending. When the Queen lifted the instrument away and sat back and looked at Kale's throat, her 4 eyes held something Kale had never expected to see in them. Satisfaction. The deep, settled kind. The kind that came not from winning but from setting something right that had been wrong for too long. Thesiv leaned forward and looked at Kale's throat with total focus. Then looked up at her face. Then, in the carefully enunciated Vorith of a child who understood that some moments required precision, it's gone. Kale reached up and touched the place where the mark had been. The skin was warm. Scarred, yes, that tissue would always be changed. But quiet. Just quiet. Yes, she said. The chamber held its breath for one more moment. 12 guards in obsidian armor. A Queen with instruments older than the compact still in her hands. A child watching with the gravity of someone who had already decided this was the most important thing they had ever seen. Then, Thesiv placed both small hands against Kale's wrist and pressed, the full Vorith gesture, not just acknowledgement, not just recognition, but the word that had no direct translation and that every child learned first, before language, before law, before the long complicated business of being alive in a universe that kept getting things wrong. I see who you are. Kale closed her hands gently over Thesiv's and didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say that the room wasn't already holding. Outside, the relief physician's transport was 30 minutes out. In an hour, Kale would gather her kit and pass the case notes and walk back through the checkpoints that had always read the mark and tensed and now would find only a medic, cleared, unremarkable, moving through the world without the weight of a dead soldier's mistake stitched into her skin. She would feel that for a long time before she believed it. But, right now, in the amber light of the Vorith throne chamber, with the Queen rising in silence and the guards standing down one by one and Thesiv's hands warm against hers, she let herself of just this, the moment after the long wrong thing was finally, quietly, corrected.